trouble by suggesting the title that you've already have learnt about. Before I make my, so to say, formal presentation, I would like to make this disclaimer that whatever I'm presenting is my own understanding based on my own learning of what Islam is and it stands for, and what went wrong with its presentation and why did it happen. It's not that I am representing the views of all Muslims. The other thing is that for a topic of as obvious significance as the one that I'm trying to talk about, it will really be a futile exercise if I'm not frank and I keep mentioning things which really are not going to talk about the real issues. And that is what is going to make it slightly difficult for me to say what I'm going to say. But I hope you're going to bear with me, and the subsequent discussion is going to allow my other friends, especially my friends who share my faith, to talk about their perspective, and hopefully at the end of it we'll come up with something which is more clear, and we'll go back with views and issues that we can think more about. What does Islam stand for is the first thing that I would like to spend a few minutes on. We Muslims, we believe that it's the message of God. It invites us to worship one God who is the creator, the sustainer of this world. We are asked to live this life of ours with an understanding that it's a trial, and sooner or later we are going to be faced with an accountability process, and all that we're going to do in this life is going to ultimately result in the future that is going to be declared in the form of a verdict. So we believe in God, we believe in the life hereafter, and therefore we are expected to lead a life which is exemplary, which has to be undertaken with a view to ensuring that we succeed in another life which is going to last forever. The end result of this belief system is that we are expected to be good. Good in our relationship with God, good in our relations with fellow human beings. All that is virtue, all that is goodness is to be promoted by us, by our words, by our deeds, and this message is to be shared with everyone. It is meant for everyone, and we are expected to invite others to also consider it. It's something we believe is in line with the voice of our conscience, and it is something which promotes nothing but goodness. Promotion of what is good and virtue, and admonition and condemnation of what is evil is what Islam stands for. However, unfortunately, the way Islam is perceived, at times presented, and sadly at times practiced, gives us a picture which is not clearly what I've mentioned. It's somewhat different. There are people, non-Muslims understandably, and I can assure you, some Muslims as well, who have a feeling that the tall claims made by the Muslims regarding their faith are not matched, not just by the practice that they see of the Muslims, but also by the teachings that they are given to understand and learn. For example, it is a claim, it is a complaint that is made against not just Muslims, but Islam and its teachings, that it teaches its believers and adherents to not be friendly with the non-believers, at times to be aggressive and try as best as is possible in order to achieve political dominance, to be militarily aggressive as well. It is claimed that Islamic teachings do not present an understanding which is equal for both genders. Women are discriminated against. It is complained against the teachings that the people are not open, those who believe. It's against the creative arts, music, paintings, portraits, etc. are looked down upon. And there are a number of other serious problems that is causing good for the humanity. I would just briefly try to respond to some of the complaints. Not that it's my topic for the afternoon, but just as a prelude to what I have to say later, I would just mention that I'm not surprised that the criticism that we confront about Islam, and this is my fault, really I had planned to pour it off, and I didn't do it. I'll do it. Just pour it to silence. I'm not surprised that people, non-Muslims, are raising these complaints. I have shared this understanding with you that there are Muslims also who have a problem in facing some of the understandings, some part of the teaching, which they believe is perhaps not possible for us to now defend. My own very honest understanding is that Islam, as the message of God, it stands for peace, stands for concern for the entire humanity. It presents the understanding of all humans as complete equals. It promotes creative art. It invites all humans to take the opportunity of availing the potential that they have within themselves and within the surroundings to the best of their abilities. And there aren't any restrictions whatsoever, except for the moral restrictions which all humanity agrees to. It is another matter that in some part of the moral expectations there could be disagreement amongst peoples of different parts of the world. And therefore the Almighty has come up with a very limited list of do's and don'ts that we call Sharia, which are as if the verdicts of the Almighty to clarify still further some of the problems, some of the difficulties, some of the confusion that could be there with regard to some questions regarding the moral behavior of the humans. The reason why these complaints, disagreements emerged is because the understanding of Islam was not presented properly. Why it was not presented properly, I'm making this claim because in some cases, if not many, it was not understood properly. And that is why I insisted that the title of the topic should be Internal Causes. I am not here to make a complaint that non-Muslims have not done a good job in receiving Islam well. They are making their observations because they feel that what is presented before them is not completely acceptable, and therefore there needs to be clarifications and explanations offered. Now, why exactly is it that there has been a difference in the ideals that we normally present in the name of Islam, and the real picture that we have before us in the form of the practices and many of the presentations that are made about Islam. I'll present three reasons why I believe that Islam has been misunderstood by many internally, by the Muslims themselves. One reason, the first reason is that there has been an absence of a balance between following and respecting the tradition of Islam and ensuring an ongoing process of critical examination and understanding of the text. In other words, what I'm saying is that Muslims, in many cases, have generally speaking been more loyal to the tradition that they have observed in their surroundings, the way they were brought up, the way they learned their religion, without making an earnest attempt to critically try to understand what exactly was the message in its original form. We are all humans, and therefore we are all likely to err and to falter when it comes to the question of understanding. If there is somebody who points out to me that here, what you are saying is not completely correct, the only right attitude that I can offer is to ask the individual to explain to me through evidence and arguments as to why the other person believes that my understanding is incorrect. Unfortunately, what happens is that in most of the cases, when there is somebody who dares to be critical in letting many of us know that some of the things that we are doing and saying is not exactly in accordance with what Islam, the Almighty, His book, the Quran says, the response and attitude is not very welcoming. I'll give you an example, and I'll try to explain why it happens, and why is it that critical examination is something which is always necessary, vital, if we are to continue to believe in the faith and to practice it in the changing times. When you read the Quran, you would find quite often a mention that would give you an impression that keeping slaves and slave girls is a norm, is legitimate. There's no problem whatsoever. And when you look at the tradition that has emerged in the form of our literature, you would find that there aren't many people who would raise a voice of concern regarding the claim that having slaves and slave girls is okay. Because what they say is, A, that it's mentioned in the Quran. And it's mentioned in a way that you find that it's as if a norm, an acceptable practice. And there's nothing problematic in it. And B, that all along our tradition, there have been scholars who have been maintaining that this is what it is. It's okay. So, if you, as a modernist, are trying to come up with an understanding because of your modern understanding that slavery is bad, is unacceptable, well, what you as a consequence of it is you're doing is that you're challenging your faith, your book, in the light of your modern understanding. And that is where the problem emerges. That is where you have tension. That is where you have difficulty. And of course, there are different responses that emerge. Now, I am perfectly convinced. Don't ask me why. Well, you can ask it in the question answer session. But right now, I'll just give you my understanding that When I read the Quran, I have a very clear understanding that the Quran condemned slavery from day one. It's written there. However, it's another matter that slavery was as if inherited by the Quran when it was revealed. At the time of the revelation of the book, slavery was a reality. Now there could be two ways of dealing with it. A, to get rid of it overnight. B, to get rid of it gradually through different phases, to phase slavery out of existence. The first possibility would have created more harm than good, and therefore it was not considered viable. The second possibility is exactly what the Quran went for. But it went for in a manner that to begin with, what was there, the ground reality, it was acknowledged, but it was also kind of criticized. And the two went together for a certain while. And the way was paved for slavery to be gradually eliminated, at least theoretically. And if you'll ask me, I'll let you know the verses that are actually talking clearly about it. However, it was only mentioned in words. And the words had to be read and had to be critically understood. But slavery continued, unfortunately, to some extent, in some forms, and it continued to be acknowledged as a viable way of asking some people to serve others. And therefore, the literature that emerged, because it was not challenged and criticized, the understanding continued and stays with us even now, unfortunately, that Islam, it doesn't promote slavery, doesn't even condemn it, and it's a part of the teaching of the Islamic understanding that if at all it's possible for you, you can have slaves with your wife. This unfortunate understanding emerged as a consequence of critical examination of the text and understanding of it not being allowed, because tradition was so powerful, it was so strongly influential, that anybody who dared to say something different was not welcome. The second reason, the second internal reason why many of the misunderstandings regarding Islam have continued to stay is the incorrect sequence in which the two sources of understanding of Islam have been arranged in our understanding of Islam. The understanding of Islam is primarily based on the Quran, which, according to our faith, our understanding, our conviction, is the fully preserved Word of God from A to Z. It's fully preserved because it was meant to ensure that all religious understanding must go through the filter, the criterion of this source, for it to be acknowledged as acceptable or not. However, there was a lot more about religion that our tradition received through what we call the traditions of the Prophet, may Allah's mercy upon him, called ahadith. Those ahadith, the words of the Prophet, the practices of him, which were witnessed, heard, and transmitted to the next generation, one individual to another, found their way into books, which then became extant and very popular, and of course, not surprisingly, because all those details that were attributed to the Prophet, they received a lot of respect, attention, and interest amongst the Muslims. It was because of this overwhelming response that people offered to this otherwise very important reservoir of knowledge that the Quran went into the background. It was there, revered, respected, honored, however, not given the status that it itself declares it deserves. It has come, according to the Quran has come to dominate the affairs of religious matters for the Muslim. But far from it dominating, it was dominated by the other source. Because of the obvious psychological reason. When you say that this is what the Prophet, may Allah's mercy be on him, said, well, you really impressed, you're influenced. You would say that, well, the text is from God, how can we properly understand it? We are too ordinary to be able to understand it. It has to be the Prophet who understood it better than us. And because he understood it, and he gave his own understanding and clarification, it has to be the correct one. Forgetting the fact that what is coming from the Prophet to us is also what we understand. He's not speaking to us directly on a one-to-one basis. The message that we are getting in the form of hadith is a message A, which the Almighty did not promise to preserve completely and fully. We do not even know in many cases what the exact context was. And last but not the least, it was a message which in the first 2 centuries of the existence of the Muslim Ummah, it was not even available to everybody. So how could it be possible that that source of knowledge could be given the central position for the Muslim to understand their religion? I'll just give you one example. Well, don't imagine that I'm saying that hadith is not important. It's brilliant. It is something that one would be foolish to ignore. But honestly, its brilliance lies in its understanding in the light of the Quran. When you put hadith on top of the Quran, everything gets disturbed. The sequence is reversed. The scheme of the Almighty as if is shaken. And what you have as a consequence is not what I believe and claim was the intent of the Almighty. I'll give you an example. I mentioned that there is a claim, and it is a popular understanding, that a devout Muslim would rather stay away from music. And a devout Muslim would not allow these photographs of living beings to be tolerated. It's because it is condemned in hadith. Any mention in the Quran? None whatsoever. But of course, hadith is also religious. It's a religious source and is equally important. Now, did the Almighty design the Quran to give a few things and then later the Muslims to be given a few more through hadith, which is what most of the traditionalists say? Well, the fact of the matter is that what hadith says is in actual fact has to be related to what the Quran is saying. And when the relationship is understood and clarified, then what you find is a brilliant sequence of a text which is practically getting clarified. So, for example, in the Quran it is mentioned that the people who worship anyone other than God are going to be disappointed on the day of judgment when they would find that none is going to come to their rescue, and it's only God who is going to decide about their performance on the basis of merit of what they did. And they'll be asked to seek the help of those whom they were worshipping in their worldly life, if they can come to their rescue. And they'll make an attempt, but they'll not be able to do it. And what we find in hadith is the same thing mentioned, but of course not quite as clearly, in a different way. that the people who make pictures, the people who paint, create sculptures, idols, are on the day of judgment going to be asked to instill life into those pictures. And they're not going to be able to do it, and therefore they're going to be punished. Now, there are many Muslims who believe that because the picture of a living being is actually as if, if you do it, it is as if you are mimicking the Almighty and you're trying to challenge Him. It's only He who can create life, and therefore you are making the picture of somebody living. How can you make it? So you're going to be punished for that reason. Well, apart from that, the truth is, the Quran has mentioned that the people who worship false gods, they are the ones who will be disappointed on the day of judgment, and they'll be asked to seek help from them there, but they'll find that they're not going to come to the rescue because they were the ones who were worshipped without any justification. So what I'm trying to say is that when you go into the detail of hadith and you do your research and you care to relate what is mentioned there with what is mentioned in the Quran, you would find that the relationship is absolutely clear, and it makes sense, and it helps in further understanding and clarifying the message. But if you take it away from the text and you make it an independent source of understanding, there are going to be a number of difficulties that will arise. Likewise in the case of music. The Almighty says in the Quran that all the duties of this life have been made by God for His humans, creatures. They should enjoy it and they should thank Him. It's all for them. After all, who else is there for whom the Almighty created all this? It's meant for you. That is what the Quran says. And He asks, challenges, who is the one who says that the Almighty has prohibited any of these duties? Indeed, if there is any duty which is used for the purpose of obscenity, something that is used for the purpose of causing harm to others, or doing what is called polytheism, that is what is wrong. But otherwise, all beauty, whether what you can see or what you can hear or in any other forms, it's all from God, and it is meant for the humans that He has created, for them to benefit from, to enjoy, and to thank God. And you find in the hadith the criticism and condemnation of music. One understanding is that it's all music. Well, I know that a good part of music is brilliant. It's beauty of ear. And most certainly there's another part which can cause evil to be created. Now, the hadith, if understood in the light of the Quran, is clear. But if it is understood independent of it, it would mean all music, all forms of music are prohibited, which is exactly what many Muslims believe. And last problem or reason why Islam has been misunderstood, and it's an internal reason, is that the Quran, if you understand its text and if you read it as an objective reader, I say objective reader because it's difficult to be objective. It is difficult to be objective because if you are a Muslim, you are a born Muslim, you are born into a family which is a Muslim family, it has its own point of view, its own ideas, and those ideas would stay with you when you will read the Quran. So it's a challenge, but it's an important challenge to be met. To stay away from the influences that you have gathered from your environment and try to read the text the way it is. If you will do it, I can assure you that you will find at least some part of the Quranic text is era specific, was meant for the time when the Quran was getting revealed only, and not for all times. I'm not saying that. It's the Quran which is saying that. This is something which many people would not like to hear, because they would say that it's meant for all times to come, Of course, it's a book for all times to come. But the book itself says that the manner it has been presented, it is serving two purposes simultaneously. Guiding the messenger and his companions in what they were doing to achieve the ultimate objective that was set forth for them by the Almighty to be achieved during the lifetime of the Prophet. And there was another part of the Quran, I would say a more substantial part of it, which was meant for all times to come. Now, just wait for a while for me to be able to give you an example. But if, for instance, what I'm saying is correct, and somehow I have been able to convince you that it's correct, then of course it's important that we should objectively, with an open mind, try to find out as to which part of the Quran was meant for only the times when it was getting revealed, and which of it was meant for all times to come. And if we are able to discern the two categories, we will be able to benefit from the text the way it was designed to be benefited from. You know, when I talk to my friends, and of course there are people who really get very emotional about this statement when I make it, that not the entire Quran was practically meant to be applied and practiced for all times to come. They say that if you do that, that's a very serious statement to make. So I tell them that, look, if I give you an example, just one example, which makes it absolutely clear that this particular example could not have been for all times to come. Have I not done enough to convince you that some part of the Quran is not practically applicable for all times to come? Well, the example is very simple. The Quran mentions in one of its chapters, one of its surah, the 33rd surah, that the wives of the messenger, may God have mercy on him, they are the mothers of the believers. And therefore, nobody can marry them after he dies. Nobody can marry them after he dies. This instruction did not have any practical application after the last of his wives died. It became practically not relevant, but it's a part of the Quran even today. And there are many other verses, therefore, which also would naturally belong to the same category. And now I'll talk about what the last of these issues. Well, example. I'll try to give an example. You see, you talk about Islam, you talk about difficulties in Islam, in understanding Islam, and you don't talk about jihad, then you've not talked at all. You know, the question has become so very commonplace that you have to explain as to what it is. The Quran makes a statement, a clear statement. You have to say,